with Boston. Good afternoon. We apologize for the delay and we will begin right away. Technologies of Intelligence and Digital Design, abbreviated TID, the interdisciplinary postgraduate program of the Catholic University of São Paulo, founded by Lucia Santaella, was inaugurated in 2006. In its 15th year of existence, it is offering a number of series under the name TIDDigital, each dealing with topics from the program's various study fields. We have had series on artificial intelligence and art, artificial intelligence and law, artificial intelligence and ethics, and on intelligent business technologies. Today, I am pleased to introduce a new series on cognitive semiotics. It is divided into 2 episodes. Today, in English, the question is cognitive semiotics, what is it? Tomorrow, same time, same place, in Portuguese, the second episode will be on artificial intelligence and cognition, Cognição Artificial. The interdisciplinary MA and PhD program, TID, deals with the contemporary challenges posed by the digital technologies. It counts on the cooperation of the following interdisciplines: computation, information technologies, social networks, cognition and education, design and aesthetics, and artificial intelligence. Today's focus is on cognition, a research field of an interdiscipline of its own called cognitive science. Collaborators of this research field are scholars from the disciplines of cognitive psychology and philosophy, linguistics and anthropology, computer science, and artificial intelligence. Why should cognition be a topic of research for students whose professional background and perspectives are in areas such as computation, digital design, social networks, robots, or artificial intelligence? Cognition has to do with perception, seeing, hearing, feeling, etc., thinking, reasoning, memory, learning, emotion, and consciousness. TID cannot have the ambition to address all of these issues. Instead, its focus is on questions concerning cognition in more specific respects. How does our daily interaction with intelligent technologies influence or enhance our capacities of cognition? Do computers, robots, and other so-called technologies of intelligence perceive? Do they think? May they have beliefs? Are these technologies intelligent at all? Can they feel? Are they autonomous agents? Or will they become so? Or do they only imitate human minds whose instruments they are, while they only seem to act like them? Some answers to these questions from the field of cognitive science can be found in theses elaborated by graduate students of TID, among whose topics you can find Artificial Intelligence and Bioevolution, Alexandre Quaresma, Electronic Computers as Autonomous Semiotic Agents, Riccardo Gazzoni, Semiotics of Artificial Life, Eduardo Camargo, or Video Games as Complex Semiotic Machines, Enrique Bittencourt. Others can be found in several of the thematic issues of the electronic journal of TID, whose title is Revista Digital de Tecnologias Cognitivas, TCOGS. Among its issues that have dealt with the topic of cognition in some way or other are those on collective intelligence, cognition and information, cognitive artifacts for building knowledge, artificial intelligence, or digital humanities. Quite a number of the studies on issues of cognition conducted at TID have taken inspiration in the philosophy of cognition of Charles Sanders Peirce. This is why we are happy to have with us today the internationally renowned philosopher Vincent Colapietro, who is as much expert in Charles Sanders Peirce as he is on the philosophy of mind, having been translated into Portuguese with his book in Portuguese, Peirce e a abordagem do self, uma perspectiva semiótica sobre a subjetividade humana. Professor Vincent Colapietro has been liberal arts research professor of philosophy at Penn State University until 2015 and is currently professor in New England at the Center for the Humanities of the University of Rhode Island. He is well known in São Paulo. For decades, he has been a guest of the Catholic University at conferences organized by Lucia Santaella and Ivo Ibri, among others. Why should Peirce, who lived from 1839 until 1914, have answers to questions of the philosophy of mind in the 21st century? This could be the leading question in our discussion with Professor Colapietro today. Peirce has actually written on machines in relation to minds, but his relevance to the contemporary philosophy of mind seems to go much beyond the paper of 1887, whose title was Logical Machines. Peirce was the author of the philosophy that postulated the continuity between mind and matter, and hence human thinking and mechanical computing or reasoning. More specifically, he defended theses such as 1. Every thought or cognitive representation is of the nature of signs. 2. We cannot think without signs, since all cognition, all thought is in signs. 3. The thoughts of a living writer are as much in any printed copy of his writings, and we may add today in his Technology of Intelligence, than they are in his brain. Thought is not necessarily connected with the brain. It appears in the work of bees, of crystals, and throughout the purely physical world. 5. It is a mistake to conceive of mind and matter as absolutely distinct. Are such ideas still relevant to the current debate on minds and machines. Dear Vincent, welcome in our TIDDigital. Please feel free to choose from these questions and topics the ones that you find of greatest interest to the study of cognition at TID. And do not hesitate to address issues that you might find even more relevant. But if you don't mind, please tell us first about some of the links between your own career and studies in cognitive semiotics and other fields, perhaps, at the Catholic University of São Paulo.
Okay.
Welcome. The word is yours.
Thank you so much. It's so good to hear your voice and to see you. I also apologize. I am responsible for us being late. So I must begin with a confession. I am uncertain, as much as I have read, and I have read a bit, I'm uncertain just what cognitive semiotics is. I know what it might be. I know what a Peircean would take it to be. But when I scan the field, I find that things, imagine looking through a microscope and the thing at which you are looking, it becomes in focus and then it gets out of focus. And so I think of cognitive semiotics in that fashion. There seems to be an object of study that is finely focused, and then there's a loss of focus. And I find this, I find this principally because of inadequately thought through relationship with semiotics. So I think, so what calls itself cognitive semiotics seems to have grown out of cognitive science. And it seems to have not sufficiently deep roots in any semiotic theorist, including Peirce. So I must say I'm a little bit confused often when I read this. So if we approach it from a Peircean point of view,
yes.
If we approach it from a Peircean point of view, let's imagine what Peirce might have said. So those papers from the late 1860s are part of what's called the cognition series, as you well know, and so cognition is, and your quotations make this point very securely, solidly, cognition is essentially a semiotic process. But there's a facet to this that needs to be highlighted, because with Peirce, it's never, the question of knowledge needs to be reframed. And there is a sense in which Peirce does not have an epistemology. I know this sounds heretical. Peirce does not have an epistemology if we think of epistemology in its traditional form. The theory of knowledge crystallized around the question of skepticism. And it was an attempt to either prove or disprove the very possibility of us knowing anything at all. To a great extent, Peirce was not interested in that question. He was not troubled, as contemporary epistemologists were, by whether knowledge is possible. He was much more concerned with how can we assist the growth of knowledge. So there's a shift. And I would say, and I'm following Ransdell here, there's a shift from what traditionally epistemology has been to methodology. For Peirce, it's a question of how. How can we take what we know, or what we suppose we know, and use that to discover what we do not know. So the focus is upon learning. The focus is upon discovery. This focus is upon an open-ended process in which the very foundations of what we take to be secure might turn out in the course of inquiry to be insecure or unstable. So I read Peirce as an anti-foundationalist, but equally an anti-skeptic. We do not need foundations in order to have knowledge. We do not have to, that's the Cartesian trap, to suppose we need absolutely secure foundations. That's one among various Cartesian traps. So what we need are self-corrective processes. So what we need to institute as best we can in the course of inquiry are self-corrective processes whereby we can detect and correct our errors. So for me then, the pursuit of knowledge is an ever more refined set of self-corrective practices. And the emphasis then falls upon process, upon practice, upon embodiment, and upon what's called enactment. I think, or extended, better put for our purpose today. I think Peirce anticipated very clearly an extended theory of mind. So the question of the locus of mind is not in the individual consciousness. It certainly is not in an individual disembodied, purely spiritual consciousness, right? And so what tools are extensions of the body. Even simple technologies, a hammer, even a pencil. So imagine what a computer is as a somatic extension. We pour our intelligence into these collective, extended repertoires of artifacts. So for me, following Peirce, mind is multiply located. It doesn't have a single or absolute locus. And there's a sense in which the community is the locus of intelligence, and my individual intelligence is realized first and foremost by means of my participation in the community of inquiry. But the community of inquiry is not to be mystical or to be overly ontological, but the community of inquiry is part of the very community of being. My being is continuous with the very being of other beings. So while Descartes begins with the assumption that consciousness is cut off from the world, it's cut off from its own body, it assumes the existence of language without explaining it. It assumes the existence of an intelligence that is either pre or extra linguistic, whereas Descartes assumes all of that. Aristotle, Vico, Hegel, Peirce stand in a very different lineage. The body is essential. Others are essential. Others are, I come to my self-understanding only in and through my relationship to others. So there is what Peirce calls twoism, from the Latin familiar form of you, two, right? So I'm always addressing another, whether I'm conscious or intending to do so or not. Thought is always addressed to a thou, to a two, to a you. So rather than a monological conception of thought, we have an irreducibly dialogical conception of thought where the I and the you are equally primordial. No I without a you, no you without an I. That means we, you and I together. So we has a reality in Peirce. It has in very few philosophers. It certainly had it in Aristotle. It certainly had it in Hegel. So my first run through is that there's something exciting happening in what traditionally calls itself cognitive, or what in contemporary language calls itself cognitive science. And I'm sorry, cognitive semiotics. Cognitive semiotics. There's something exciting going on, but there has not been a careful enough effort to think through the relationship between semiotics and the study of cognition. And it's been cognitive semiotics has been unduly constrained by certain assumptions that we can leave signs apart and focus on meaning. We can think about thinking as commutation, and all of these seem to me to be erroneous views. And if we thought through cognitive semiotics in more strictly, carefully Peircean terms, we would not have to reinvent the wheel to the extent that folks in cognitive semiotics are reinventing the wheel. It seems to me that begin with a highly flexible but nuanced conception of semiosis, sign activity, and from there try to give it specificity and determination by context. So the Peirce's notion of semiosis is in one sense very abstract and very general, but that enables it to be very concrete because it can be applied to so many different contexts. So I think your students are very lucky. And they're very lucky because you're coming to the study of cognition with a very powerful model of semiosis, mind, and cognition in all of its forms, from perception to the most abstract forms of reasoning. You and Lucy are coming at these phenomena with a very powerful model of at least three things, right? Of meaning, of mind, and of knowledge in all of its forms. So, but you're not doing it in an antiquarian or a purely scholarly way. You're attuned to the cutting edge. What's going on in the new technologies? What are the implications of these new technologies? And so you're trying to marry the older with the newest, not merely the newer, the newest. What's the cutting edge? And so coming at it from traditional disciplines such as linguistics, such as literary studies, such as philosophy, such as psychology, including psychoanalysis. You're coming at these questions from traditional disciplines, but with an attunement to what's just now emerging at the cutting edge of cultural processes and practices. So I find that immensely exciting. And just one other thing, and then I want to hear from you. You mentioned the various groups that make up the constituents of your audience, from design, from education, from social networks, and I'm missing them. And I'm like, and one of the things that's necessary is to give individuals coming from these diverse backgrounds with these diverse interests, to give them a language where they could begin to talk about their common concerns. And what it seems to me Peirce does is precisely that. He gives folks with different interests from different backgrounds, with different aspirations, a common language in which they can, and then we can't learn from one another if we're speaking a completely foreign tongue. We need to have a common tongue. And then we can see the analogies between design and education. The other thing, and I will stop. The other thing is there's something definitive about Peirce's emphasis on self-criticism. His theory is ultimately a critically reflexive theory. It's a critique of itself. It's a critique of itself and its various applications. And it seems to me that part of the power of Peirce is that he gives us the resources to become ever more self-critical, self-conscious, and self-controlling. So I find this immensely important, to share a common language with people from disparate, different backgrounds that enable them to be critical of others, but much more importantly, to be critical of themselves.
Thank you for these many ideas. May I pick up some of them to address questions such as artificial intelligence and machines more generally.
Right.
You said, I would like to draw our attention to three of your topics. The first was self-correction. You gave much emphasis to self-correction in humans, but as we know, self-correction is a feature precisely of artificial intelligence. So is this one of the points where we can see a convergence of human minds and artificially intelligent machines? Perhaps I leave it with that question and address the other ones later.
Right. So let me back up a step. Thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question. Let me back up a step and say that there's a very, very famous passage. It's contained in volume 5 of the collected papers, where Peirce is post-Darwinian. And whereas classical Western thought often would draw an absolutely sharp line between the human being and other animals, for Peirce, as a post-Darwinian, the human animal is just that. The human being is the human animal. And there's no absolutely sharp line between the human animal and other animals. And precisely on the question of self-control and self-consciousness. Other animals, Descartes did not even think other animals were conscious, let alone self-conscious. There's some evidence that some animals, other than humans, are self-conscious. They have some awareness. They recognize themselves in a mirror. So we need to discourse about these matters in fine detail and in close connection with the empirical studies, the most recent empirical studies. So there's no absolutely sharp line between the human animal and other animals, and precisely concerning self-control and self-consciousness. And the notion of when Peirce defines scientific or experimental intelligence, he defines it as the capacity to learn from experience, which in part is the capacity of experience to remake our habits such that they are more finely and fully attuned to the habits of the beings we encounter in experience. So to get to your question, I think he blurs the line not merely between the human animal and other animals, but between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And as you say in one of your articles that I just reread recently, the notion of quasi is very instructive and useful. He sometimes will talk about it's as if, right? It's as if there is an interpreter, or it's as if there is an utterer. And it seems to me that quasi-mind is an expression he uses. And he's hedging his bet. He doesn't want to make too strong a claim, but he doesn't certainly want to make too sharp a divide. So it's with regard to machines are intelligent. The question, and in certain respects, they're more intelligent than human beings. They can in terms of chess games, in terms of certain kinds of activities, just simply computing, they can far outstrip human intelligence. So are they intelligent? Yes. Are they intelligent in some of the same ways human beings are intelligent? Yes. Including, can they learn? Can they correct? And it goes back to a point you made earlier in terms of perception. There's no question that we can make machines that are really skillful at pattern recognition, in that and as far as I know, if they make mistakes in recognition of patterns, they build those mistakes into refining the operations going forward. So on the surface, it looks like these are quasi-intelligent, or let's just say they're intelligent. Are they intelligent to the same degree as human beings? And there's where I hesitate. There's where I hold out. Because I think there is an open-ended level of self-correction and self-control. And I'm not sure that we're at that point with any machine we've been able to make. So, yes. Please.
Thank you. These are the answers I was expecting, but also other answers. But let me go back to your other remarks concerning human nature. Peirce has certainly answers both for the affinities between intelligent machines and humans, and for the non-affinity, for the differences. Let's only consider his paper on the reality of God. Of course, we do not expect intelligent machines to reflect on this topic. But however that may be, more closely to what you said was the topic, more close to what you said was another topic, dialogue. You said that thinking is dialogical. Now, with whom would an intelligent machine enter into a dialogue? On the one hand, it's the same as in my view, but perhaps have a better scope to answer this question. There's some similarity with the question of self-correction and the capacity for dialogue. Without dialogue, there is no self-correction. But if thinking is dialogical, how could machines, intelligent machines, enter into dialogue with themselves? If you think of how a machine learns to dominate such complex games as chess, you find that they play against themselves. Is that not a kind of dialogue? Or is what is dialogue and what is thinking as a dialogical process?
Right. No, that's a very good question. It's also a very challenging question. So I, as you were speaking, I was thinking also machines can be self-monitoring. They can detect something in their operating system that's not going well or not operating well. But if I shift the ground a little, because I was thinking again as you were speaking, there is the affective dimension of human mind and consciousness, or the human psyche, and it's not merely the emotional, but it's also the deeply affective relationship. Is it possible for a machine to care about a human being, another, as other? Now, could this, and the relevance of this question is, it might not such solicitude, my care for you as the unique you are, might not such solicitude be a condition for certain forms of dialogue? Now, it is rather significant and underexplored that Peirce identified what traditionally were the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, as logical sentiments. And he thought that one could not be fully logical unless one was animated. And he redefines these terms that are both his redefinitions are both continuous with traditional understanding, but also quite innovative in their own right. But one could not be fully logical without possessing these virtues, these sentiments, without being animated by faith, hope, and charity. And it seems to me that there might be truth there, and if there is, then the limits of machine intelligence would be the limits of their affective commitments, or their their ability to obtain and refine the so-called logical sentiments of faith, hope, and charity. Can they be intelligent in certain ways? Yes. Are they limited? Apparently. Might those limitations trace their root to their inability, in the final analysis, to love? Because for Peirce, agape is absolutely crucial. The capacity to love the other as the other is absolutely crucial. And it's not, and here's one of those places where Peirce is unwilling to divide the cognitive and the affective. Right? In him, they're together. Right? And so the limits of artificial intelligence might be the limits of genuine affection of the logical sentiments. Can they think? Unquestionably. Can they think in sophisticated, self-corrective, self-monitoring ways? Unquestionably. It's not so much falling short, but are they different from human intelligence in this regard? Yes. One other point. To what extent can they make wild errors? To what extent can they fall into mistakes that seem to call much too much into question? Because for Peirce, we are deeply fallible animals. And this is actually once we've managed to survive for, well, we'll see what the upcoming decades bring, but let's leave that to the side. Once we were able to survive, we turned that vulnerability into an immense advantage. We turned the vulnerability of fallibility into a tremendous advantage, because all science is making mistakes intelligently. It's being able to see that we have made a mistake, then to ascertain the source, the root of the error, and then to correct. So it's a continual process of self-correction that's predicated on ineradicable fallibility. We're not. This is actually a good thing, that we're so mistake prone. Now, can you make a machine? Can you make a machine to make as many mistakes as human beings?
They always say,
if you can't,
mistakes of machines, of robots, the possible mistakes, but never talk about human mistakes. You're perfectly right. Yeah. But these are the some of the questions, and they show that we need philosophy of cognition in the field to answer these elementary questions. And philosophers have given such answers, but they have contradicted themselves in the sense that some give this answer, others have given that answer. One of the answers has been about intentionality. The other has been about consciousness. Can you say something about these two? And to anticipate you to possible answer, but you give your own answer, of course. Some of these answers are so sure about human nature that I think it is healthy to look at what is going on in artificial intelligence and what questions the certainty that some thinkers, including philosophers, have about human intentions, human consciousness, etc.
Right. So here is one of the places where it seems to me Peirce's notion of synechism is especially relevant. Of course, this is his doctrine of continuity. And so there's no absolutely sharp line to be drawn here. Help me, I just had my mind slipped. Just please ask that question just slightly differently. I
mentioned gave two P's. One is consciousness,
right,
and the other is intentionality.
Yeah. So if we go back to Brentano, who was, of course, the one who introduced, drawing upon the scholastics, the notion of intentionality, what he seemed to me to be committed to an anti-synechic project. He wanted to show how the feature that differentiated mental phenomenon from all other phenomenon, that what distinguishes the mental from the physical, as though there's an absolutely sharp line of demarcation between the two. Now, and he also began in a somewhat introspective way. It was the mind reflecting upon its own activity. I think Short and others have suggested something that's really crucial, that purposive behavior is the key out of which ever more refined and abstract forms of intentionality have evolved. So the notion that an animal is conscious and has thoughts about something. So it's just part of the very comportment of the animal to be oriented toward the world and to be animated by quasi-purposes. So I think what we understand by the intentionality in that narrow mentalistic sense can be explained naturalistically if we think about animal behavior, and we think about the animal's looking for food. It takes this smell to be indicative of the presence of food nearby, but in fact it's mistaken. And there's something about it, there's an aboutness there, and we don't have to posit anything mysterious under the rubric of intentionality. That's not altogether adequate, but I think it points us in the right direction. That a naturalistic account can begin to render intentionality intelligible. The other question regarding consciousness, it seems to me that Peirce is immensely useful on this. He spilled a lot of ink. And he spilled a lot of ink in his correspondence with William James, who obviously was very important in the history of psychology and was concerned with delineating in a very finely detailed way consciousness. In some of those letters, they're virtual essays where Peirce is writing to James and talking about what consciousness might mean. And it seems to me that here's where the power of the categories just shines forth, because he distinguishes between monadic sort of dream consciousness, polar or dyadic consciousness, and then synthetic or mediational consciousness. And it seems to me that much of what contemporary cognitive science, cognitive semiotics, they want to operate oftentimes with a purely univocal notion of consciousness. And obviously consciousness is a word possessing many meanings. And it possesses at least three fundamentally different meanings: qualitative consciousness, polar consciousness, synthetic or mediational consciousness. So the interesting thing is that the higher the form of consciousness, the more easily replicable it is by machines. The so-called lower forms of consciousness, purely qualitative consciousness, are the ones that are most difficult to replicate in machines. So I think that Peirce's philosophy, and Mark Champagne's book is pretty good here, Consciousness and the Theory of Signs. So I think that Peirce has much to say about the question of consciousness, and what philosophers ought to do well, Peirce does exceedingly well, and that is to draw the relevant distinctions and not to suppose that we can get along with one word or with a univocal sense of such a complex, nuanced word as consciousness. So I think that there are tremendous resources in Peirce's phenomenology, in his theory of signs, in his cosmology, to address questions of consciousness. And I also think that there are resources for understanding intentionality.
Yes. We have still about 10 minutes, and we are coming to a more difficult topic. Perhaps before we open the space for questions, let me give you a choice of difficult questions. Life, for example. Does intelligence presuppose life? How about artificial life? Is life a dividing line between machines and biological beings or not?
So I tend to think that life is a condition for intelligence. The problem is nothing is alive except in an environment, and nothing could sustain itself apart from an ambiance. So machines have a history that suggests a kind of life. That is to say, they have evolved. They have evolved, obviously, in conjunction with natural intelligence. But natural intelligence has just as obviously evolved because of its of the ability to use and refine ever new technologies. So human intelligence is dependent upon artificial extensions, and that little dialogue where Peirce, in the early writings, he does it several places, talks about words being utterly dependent upon human beings. And he says, well, that's not quite. There's a mutual dependence between language and humanity. And words could turn around and say, you know, you can think what you think because of us. And it very well might be that that's the analog for understanding our relationship or the relationship between artificial and natural intelligence.
That's it. I think that's a key to the underlying key. Perhaps you can explain this quote, to which you only made very brief reference to the listeners. What did Peirce say exactly?
We should go back. I should grab the book and read it. But what he says is that words only mean what we make them mean, but then he imagines words turning around and say, that's not the whole story. That's not the complete picture. You human beings mean what we allow you to mean. And so there is this mutual dependence, this deep mutual dependence between language and humans. And humans, language obviously depends upon us having somehow created it and somehow having refined it over decades and centuries. But in turn, we depend utterly upon language.
Yes, and this not on language, on machines. That's
on machines. So that
situation, and this brings us to the end of our dialogue, but not to the end of our program, because we have questions from the audience, and Louis Philippe will tell us what these questions are.
Okay.
I think they are about the topics. Poliana. The ability to love that makes us human. Would the machines limit by affection? No, the machines limit be affection?
I think so. I mean, I would say that this ability is only one among numerous abilities. I think our ability to make fantastic and wild mistakes is also very distinctive of the human animal. So it's not, I don't want to identify our ability to love. And it's a form of transcendence, right? To transcend the self in a way that allows for transformations of the self. And Peirce was very drawn to Buddhism. in this way, and he was drawn to certain forms of Christianity in this regard as well. So I don't want to say that our ability to love is the thing that marks us off from all other beings. I suppose other beings have the capacity to love. But I do think if machines are limited in their affection, they're limited in their intelligence. I do think that.
Mm-hmm. That's a brilliant answer, yes. Second question. Can artificial intelligence produce something like a soliloquy, like Hamlet's, from an observation, conclude in a question to be or not to be?
Well, there are actually two questions there. There's the question about soliloquy in general, and then there's the question specifically about a soliloquy in which one holds up the possibility of exterminating one's own life. Those are two different. They're related, obviously, but they're not necessarily the same. So to the first, I say, yes, you made the point, and you were just dead right in making it, that higher forms of artificial intelligence can engage in self-dialogue. And a soliloquy is just another name for a self-dialogue, right? The self in dialogue with itself. That's the first question. The other question has to do with whether the machine could raise the issue of self-extermination or self-annihilation, the question of suicide. And there I plead ignorance. I think at present, there doesn't seem to be much evidence to support that, but who knows what might come in the future.
Excellent question. Number 3 is coming, I guess, or was this already 3? Nikolai, I have a question. Could you comment on the role of fallibilism in cognition?
Yeah. So there are various ways of putting it. I would say it is the engine that drives the pursuit of knowledge. That is to say, our fallibility is the engine. We are caught up short time and again by making a mistake. And it is precisely that that animates us to actually engage in the arduous work of inquiry. Locke says, and I think Peirce was aware of this passage and actually influenced by it. Locke says, the love of truth is in some ways easy. The love of finding the truth is a difficult love. The love of truth. Of course, everybody wants the truth handed to them, you know. But the arduous, oftentimes humiliating work because you make a mistake, mistake after mistake. The arduous, sometimes humiliating work of seeking the truth. That's a difficult love. So I think there's no more important role in cognition, because cognition is never knowing, it's always the pursuit of knowing, always coming to know. There's no more important feature than our fallibility.
Well, this is a topic not so good to end dialogue. Therefore, I think we might open the floor for another question.
Sure.
Although it would be possible to come to a conclusion. But let me correct myself. It's not possible to come to a conclusion with Peirce. He denies the ultimate truth and the possibility of arriving at a final conclusion.
Right.
That's the principle of fallibilism, isn't it? But let's open the floor once more. There is a question, as I see here. Let's see. Is our cognition development limited by language? In the case of artificial intelligence, their language, the ones and the zeros.
Right.
So what language is that? And don't we have a better language? I suppose that this is one of it's behind this question.
Right. So we might use language in a very narrow sense to designate natural languages such as Portuguese or English or French or Spanish. Or we might use language in a broader sense to mean any mode of symbolization. So I think that the limits of artificial intelligence are in part defined by the limits of our capacities, our symbolic capacities, not necessarily the limits of our natural language. I think we are limited, but for Peirce, that's always only a provisional limit, because there's no inherent invincible limit to what human ingenuity or imagination might yet craft in the way of symbols.
Yes, because that would be transcendentalism, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would be. And it seems that Peirce is ultimately an anti-formalist. And he understands the power of algorithms, but he also understands that not everything is reducible to algorithmic relationships. By an algorithm, I mean a finite set, usually a very small set of explicit rules that can be rendered fully, over time, fully explicit. Now, for certain purposes, in certain contexts, algorithms are immensely powerful tools, but there's not an algorithm for everything. There is a role for some norm-guided, but not strictly rule-governed forms of human ingenuity. So, yes, artificial intelligence is limited by the symbols we're able to use, fall back on. Yes, a language of just yes and no, 1 and 0, is limiting in some ways, empowering in others. But also there is this issue of algorithms. And Peirce is not ultimately a formalist who thinks that everything is formalizable. It's very interesting. He hardly says anything about codes. In the European tradition, with Saussure and Barthes, codes are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Habits, not codes.
Yes. Well, I think this is an excellent point to conclude, not in the sense of having come to a conclusion, a final conclusion, but in the sense of having come to a point where we can say we have wrapped up many topics of interest to our students, to ourselves, and your contribution to this dialogue was most important. We are very grateful to you, and it shows that philosophy is needed in our field of research because of so many open questions. But you are also needed, and we hope see you again soon.
Thank
but
you.
not on this program. This program continues tomorrow, as announced, and as can be seen on the net in Portuguese tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye then.
Bye now.